A little while ago, I was listing the specs that I'd like to see on my next new dream camera. And the most important thing for me was a full frame sensor and 6K. Now we've got quite a choice of full frame 6K sensors. There's the Arri Alexa 65. You can't buy that one. The Reds, of course, the 8K Reds with the large sensors. Sony Venice, my favourite camera at the moment. Canon C700 FF. I met a cameraman who bought one of those. I've met Canon's customer. Kinefinity Mavo LF. Great camera, I reviewed it a couple of months ago. C500 Mark II, 6K full frame. Looks great. Might just have wiped out that Canon customer I was talking about. Brand new Sony FX9. Not sure it should be on the list. It's a 6K full frame sensor, but it only outputs 4K. Then of course the Z-Cam, we all know about Z-Cam. And then there's the camera that I'm vlogging with now. When you look at the list of all the cameras I've just gone through, it's amazing I can carry this with one hand. Can you guess what it is? Let's go inside and take a proper look. Ta-da! And here it is, the Panasonic Lumix S1H. Full frame, 6K, mirrorless. Actually, I hate calling cameras that are shaped like this mirrorless. All cinema cameras are mirrorless. It's not a DLSR, but we need a new name. Maybe we should call them DSLMs. First impression, it feels heavy, chunky, but not in a bad way, in a solid, professional sort of way. And as you saw, I wanted to be the first one to show you vlogging with the S1H, but that camera conspiracies guy has beaten me to it again. From the front, this looks the same as the Lumix S1 and the S1R, but you quickly notice the S1H is a fair bit thicker. There's quite large air vents down both sides, keep everything cool. And I'm told there's a fan inside. I'm told there is because I haven't actually heard it. It must be a very large fan moving slowly. If I keep quiet, can you hear it on my mic? No. The thing you can't help but notice is the flippy screen. And it's a really good design because not only does it flip forwards, but it also tilts. So you can move it away from the camera body and away from all those pesky cables that you need to plug in from the side. Why do other manufacturers have such a problem with flippy screens? This design is brilliant and it's super bright, very sharp. I could even focus on a spider's web at 6K using this little screen. And while we're talking about screen quality, what I don't know how to show you is how good the little screen is in the eyepiece. The pixel density in this little viewfinder is a revelation and a major step up from the GH5. Talking about the GH5, I should point out that I may be a little biased when I'm looking at this camera. You see, I'm a big fan of the GH5 and I use it quite regularly, professionally as a B camera. The buttons feel familiar. Obviously the flippy screen and also the menu has the same logic. Actually, the menu is a big improvement with another layer of icons helping you to drill down and find the setting you need much quicker. So is this just a chunky, full-frame, grown-up GH5? Well, the first thing you're going to have to consider are the larger lenses you're going to need. And Panasonic have gone for the Leica-developed L mount. It's a really interesting move. It's not like there aren't L mount lenses available. You've obviously got the expensive Leica lenses, and Panasonic have promised 42 lenses by the end of 2020. And now Sigma are also on board with the L mount. So, although this L mount is probably my biggest concern, it actually could be a very clever move if all of these lenses turn up on time. Until then, the design of this L mount means there's already quite a few adapters available, and I've seen PL and EF mount adapters that would work for me. The trouble is, if I'm honest, I'm not a fan of using adapters. You always seem to lose some functionality It's either the autofocus runs slowly, if at all, or something else that's missing. And talking of autofocus, you're now looking through the S1H, and a lot of people have said it can't be better than the GH5, it's using the same system. Well, I think it is. I've got the facial tracking on now, and it seems to work. In fact, everything I shot on the beach earlier was all using full autofocus with the face tracking. All the other settings are in completely default as the camera comes out the box, so I haven't done anything clever. But this seems to work. And I can't see any hunting in the background, can you? Well, I can't see it anyway yet because I'm still recording and I haven't looked at it back. I think that's good. Panasonic with this camera lent me the 24-105 lens, and although it's a nice, well-performing lens, it's clearly aimed more for the stills photographer rather than the video shooters. The focusing on this lens is all fly-by-wire, and by default it racks focus depending on how fast you move the ring, which is totally useless for video. And rather embarrassingly, I kept overshooting the focus all the time. I couldn't use it. And then I discovered there's a menu function on the camera which will turn this into proper linear tracking. So that was my bad, and it's fine now. With a chunky camera like this, you're probably going to need some chunky batteries, so you're not going to get away with using your old GH5 ones. The good news is, these batteries seem to work very well. I'm getting almost 2 hours of continuous use out of these. You can also run the camera from the USB socket on the side, and that'll also work with the supplied battery charger. The S1H also comes with dual SD card slots, and I think it's a really good idea to have two cards the same, especially for video shooters, although I don't know who thought it was a good idea to put a second lock on this door. It's so frustrating and not needed. Anyway, without reading the manual, the first thing I wanted to do is go out and shoot some 6K pictures. Now bear with me, it's not a movie, it's just a selection of early morning shots to get a feel for how this camera operates. I did try to give this camera shots with plenty of dynamic range, and I really wanted to see just how far I could push it. I was surprised. This is a still from that morning's footage, and for me it really demonstrates how well this camera copes with really over-the-top highlights. There's nothing in this image that's now over 100%. The highlights have all been massively clipped, and yet the roll-off is really quite acceptable. I'd call it smooth, almost pleasant. For me, shooting 6K is about being able to downsample and give yourself really lovely, sharp, impressive native 4K. It's not just about the wiggle room to allow you to reframe or stabilize in post. It's also about replacing the color resolution you lose because of the Bayer filter. And the 6K on this camera is really terrific. If you don't need 6K, the S1H provides a mind-boggling array of choice, not just of resolution, but also sensor crop and codecs. Start with HD from the full frame at 4208 bit, or HD 420 10-bit at 100 frames per second. That's 100 frames per second with sound. Try full frame 4K at 422 10-bit, all ultra and 400 megabits per second. Dealing with that much data usually means you have to compromise somewhere. And you might be disappointed to know that the 6K on this camera is only 420 10-bit, not 422. But the more I use this camera, the more I realized that might be the best way to compromise. Give me bit depth over color sampling any day. It's bit depth that gives you more freedom in the grade, less banding and smoother color graduation. The amount of color resolution you lose because of lower color subsampling is more than made up by the downsampling you're going to do when delivering 4K. And keeping the 6K down to 200 megabits per second has another advantage. I was pleasantly surprised to find I had no issues editing and scrubbing through this 6K footage on my aging MacBook Pro. In fact, it behaved exactly the same as 4K. And then I started thinking, if you're delivering a project in 4K and you don't need the wiggle room for reframing that 6K gives you, which is better? Is it better to shoot in 6K at 420 and then downsample to 4K in the edit? Or is it better to shoot 4K at 422 and let the camera do the downsampling internally? It's a rabbit hole I wish I hadn't gone down, because the result I got was the opposite to what I expected. The more I tested, the more I thought 6K 420 actually looks better than the 4K 422. We're talking really slight differences in color resolution here. But the end result is I can't think of any good reason not to shoot everything I do at 6K with this camera. Well, there is one small issue. Rolling shutter. If you have a larger sensor and the full frame is a lot larger than the micro four thirds in the tiny GH5, then you might see a bit more rolling shutter. It's not a huge amount, and if it ever becomes an issue on one of your shots, you could always crop into Super 35 size, and that'll minimize the issue. In many ways, if you take everything good from the GH5, like the in-body stabilization and the 6K sensor, and you mix that with everything the video shooters want on the GH5S, like timecode and low light performance, put it into a full frame body, and you end up with the S1H. And talking about low light performance, the full frame sensor and dual ISOs of 640 and 4000 means the S1H does work very well in low light. Unfortunately, I only had an f4 lens to try out, so I couldn't do my usual comparison with the GH5S on nighttime shots of the pier. But just looking at the noise levels at 12,800, I think the S1H competes very well and is possibly cleaner. So why did I take so much time at the beginning of this video to list all of those 6K full frame cinema cameras? Well, I don't think the S1H is competing with other DSLMs. It's competing with the big boy cinema cameras. It's smudging the lines, it's blurring the lines between why you would buy a cinema camera. Is it the XLR inputs? Well, this comes with the same XLR module that goes on the GH5, so that's not an issue. Internal NDs. Yeah, but Reds don't have internal NDs. Kinefinity doesn't have internal NDs. So it's not really that. Is it all the other inputs and outputs? Potentially, on the next firmware release, this could have a raw output going to an Atomos recorder, and that gets really exciting. This isn't a B camera to one of those cine cameras. I think this camera's better than that. This camera's competing with the cinema cameras. It's not filling in any gaps. This is a serious, full-frame 6K powerhouse of a camera that produces the nicest pictures I've ever seen from any DSLM.